Pat, there is nostalgia like nostalgia, and today we're here to talk about a film that I know tons of people who are quite nostalgic for it, but one that until yesterday, I had never seen, and was sort of on my bucket list of movies to talk about,
Yeah.
and that is 1973's Westworld. I knew that the plot of the film surrounded a futuristic kind of amusement park
Yes.
where people could go and live out their fantasies of being
Right.
like cowboys or gladiators, and all the other participants were robots essentially, that something went wrong. But I wasn't ready for this hour and 28-minute bizarre science fiction slash pseudo comedy slash
Yeah.
prototypical slasher horror movie
Yeah.
that is Westworld. Now, I should clarify, I have not seen the HBO series that
I
ran
have
for four
neither have I.
seasons.
Neither have I.
Okay. So for those out there who are wondering, like, if we talk about, oh, wouldn't it be cool if they did this, and you're screaming at your computer or your phone saying they did that in the HBO show, we have no context for it.
Yeah, we don't.
Uh, but Pat, what context do you have for Westworld? Had you seen this before we talked about it, and what did you make of it? And if you did revisit it for the show, how has it changed?
Well, this was the first time I've seen it too. And as a kid, I culturally I knew about it. Again, it was just one movies were so different in 1973 because there was maybe one or two a week, and they just entered the culture. So, as a kid who was interested in movies at the time, of course, I knew about West Wing, but it was an adult film, so I wasn't going to even get close to it, nor did I have an overriding interest in seeing it. Um, so yeah, it was good to visit. It was way different than I thought it would be, for sure. And your description was right on. There were so many weird elements in it too. It seemed like it lived in a universe that was not exactly 73 and not exactly futuristic. Some sort of parallel Michael Crichton world.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's the great way to put it. It is definitely the future from 1973, but it's funny because the Westworld experience is described as the vacation of tomorrow today, I think, something like that. So this is even the people of this indeterminate future saying, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you could do this, someday? Well, we can do that now. Um, I didn't take notes during this movie except mental notes, and I was blown away by how many seeds were planted in this consciously or unconsciously of movies that would come out, and sort of people think, "Oh, these are
Amazing.
genre-defining movies," but I think a lot of that started with Westworld. I could be totally wrong about this, but I'm
No,
thinking
no, I saw the Terminator.
Terminator,
Let's
yes.
bring that up. The unkillable robot.
Very obviously, yeah, Terminator, of course, Jurassic Park. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know,
same
do you know
author.
if this was this based on a Crichton book, or was this just an original screenplay?
I think it's an original screenplay, but don't quote me on that.
Okay.
But he did definitely get. Oh, that's interesting. That little.
I
Why
wanna
we
make
put the
sure that
stock? Why we put the stock ticker on there?
I just
No.
wanna make sure that people know we're talking spoilers in case they happen to wander into this
Right.
like, "What?"
He did. He was inspired by Westworld to create Jurassic Park, the novel, which launched that uh, franchise, which I read. And John Carpenter was inspired in Halloween to make his villain unkillable, basically, which has become a cliche, quite frankly. I don't like the unkillable being or whatever, the villain or the spirit or the murderer or my hands like this.
Hey, I'm a big fan of those, slasher movies. They do get
Yeah.
repetitive, but what's interesting here is that, again, spoiler tag for anyone who doesn't know, but Yul Brynner plays, I don't think he's given a name. I don't think, but
No,
he's
it's
like
called The Gunslinger.
yeah, he's the gunslinger, the man in black. He's the villain of this western town, and he's a cyborg, and he keeps coming back, and he keeps
right.
not just coming back in terms like a Jason Voorhees or a Michael Myers where they kill him and think he's dead. He is revived by this team of scientists every night. And then when his programming goes off and he keeps, coming back even though he's burned with acid and blown up and all that
Amazing.
business, at the end, he is put down. And me as a modern horror movie watcher, I'm like, okay, where's the part where he's gonna come lurking out of the shadows and then it's gonna
That
cut
would have been a
on a
better ending.
scream? Do you think so?
I just thought it kinda just cut off at some point. Now, I was reading some of the back notes that Crichton had a hell of a time cutting this movie. I think he had to cut it down from, like, 2:45 to the current, he just had to keep chop, 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 chop. So, I don't know if he really had an ending, quite frankly. I was I would have liked the ending to be that we see the robot regenerate itself, or nobody can play an American cowboy like a Russian-born actor who played the King of Siam. Nobody. I was like, but I will say he was in the Magnificent Seven, the American remake of uh, not Rashomon, right, or Seven Samurai.
Right.
He was in the same garb, so he was making a Crichton was making a commentary on that, which I thought was interesting.
Well, I assume he didn't have the same eerie silver eyes in the
No,
Seven Samurai. That's one of those effects that I think I saw something similar in Stephen King's Salem's Lot
ah,
with the vampires, but when they get close-ups of the eyes, and of course I rented it on Amazon, so it's in a nice high definition restoration. They don't appear to glow. It's almost like there's a textured silver ball, like, in the
right,
inset of a regular eyeball. It's the damnedest thing, and it just adds to that, like, creepiness factor of this silent well, he does have a couple of lines earlier on in the film, but
right.
eventually he just becomes this stalking, cyborg that is determined to get his prey and will not stop at anything, much like the Terminator.
Well, it was a very cynical exercise for him as an actor because he literally took the role because he needed the money, according to the trivia that's been said. He was broke, and they offered him 75K, and he said, "Yep, that's about 450 right now. Not a bad payday for 1972 or three." And but he was totally broke. That's why he did it. And it turns out to be, I would say, of all the unkillable cyborgs, his is one of the best. I really enjoyed him in it. I mean, the way he definitely put like an actor's studio spin on it. You know, he really acted the hell out of that character, I thought.
Do you think I'm curious about that read on it because I feel like and maybe this is what you're referring to, but he's so blank and so robotic. You think about the Terminator, the obvious parallel we brought up a dozen times. We'll bring up 2 dozen more during this talk. But Arnold Schwarzenegger in that movie had that glower. There was
Yeah,
no doubt that he was an evil robot. In this, Yul Brynner is his expression is just kind of blank, not completely dead, but just almost like he's thinking about maybe the actor is thinking about everything he'd rather be doing than making this
right,
movie for no money. But he's calculating, but he's not
right,
passionate about it. He's just like, this is literally what I'm programmed to do. And that's what makes it even spookier because just
right.
like in the Terminator, they say you can't negotiate with it. It's going to do its job, and then it's not going to stop until it finishes the job. I get the same feeling here, but there's no crazy long explanation for what it's supposed to do.
Well, I think spooky is a perfect uh, connotation, and maybe I'm overthinking it. Crichton could have said to him, "You're a robot. Act like a robot," and that was it. That was his interpretation. But it seemed to me he put some scale into it. There was some multi-layered thing going on, or maybe I'm just overanalyzing it. But I really, again, enjoyed his robot very well. Now, overall in this film, for example, I'm going through it and I'm like, this is terrible. This is terrible. And then at some point, it locked in for me, and I'm like, I'm kind of getting this. I think it was more a little of a satire of the modern world too. A lot of I don't know. It just started to work for me. I mean, we can talk about overall conclusions later, but I was just like astounded that I at first thought this is kind of stupid, and then it moved into something that was a lot weirder than I thought it would be. So,
I
including the
I
unkillable robot part.
Right, I had the exact opposite reaction. I
Okay.
was, like, hooked from the opening moments. I mean, and part of that might be because I kept seeing all these what would become future references. It opens with a commercial, like a man on the street kinda testimonial of the people
That's
who
awesome.
visited Westworld
Yeah,
and medieval world and Roman
yeah,
world,
yeah.
which reminded me of, like, what we'd see in Verhoeven's RoboCop, years later.
Very good.
But
You
it's this Hmm?
you're saying this movie is something that a lot of directors stole from?
Well, I hesitate to use the word stole. I think inspired by because it was a very big pop cultural moment, and like I said, I know
It
tons of
was,
people who love this movie,
it was.
and I could see people saying, "I want to make my own kind of satirical version of the future. I want to expand on what they did in Westworld, or use this idea of this kind of fake
Yeah,
commercial to underscore a point." Yeah, it's that fine line between homage and theft, but uh, the I love just the filmmaking of it. I don't know why Crichton didn't have a bigger career because you think about what they would have to do today. I imagine the HBO version probably has all the
oh,
technology
yeah,
and money and CGI in the
yeah,
world.
yeah,
In
yeah,
this, you're trying to sell a future of this gigantic craft that's transporting these rich tourists to this place that might be on another planet. It might be in like a virtual zone or something because you see them kind of flying through clouds, but then it's like the
right,
Wide West territory, but you see this mostly on computer like TV monitors. You get some vague shots of what this craft looks like. It's never like a full shot of the ship. So you could see Crichton really making the most of what he had to work with. I think that limitation made it much more interesting. Like, I want to see how this all works. He's like, nope, I'm just going to give you a tease.
right. Somewhat like the mechanical shark that wouldn't work in Jaws, and Jaws turned out. Now, interesting you mentioned Westworld as a cultural reference. It did affect that decade. I recall that people would go back and reference Westworld, down the line, especially when technological things occurred. When you think about it, this movie predicted AI
Yes.
because the first off, the infrastructure of this place, what the hell? How many people do they employ? There are less people in Jurassic Park and they had dinosaurs. I mean,
Well,
it looked like NASA. I mean, it's like, and they're all white coats, even though they're just anyway.
no. To your point, I mean, I I was thinking that the people in the white lab coats with the headsets and they're smoking and drinking coffee, I feel like Spielberg was paying homage to Crichton in Jurassic Park with Samuel L. Jackson's character, because as they're panning across the computer banks, I just kept imagining I was gonna see his character, like, at one of those terminals.
He would have
Um,
been like 20 at the time, so
yeah
25 or so at the time. So
yeah, been a real, Lawrence
possible.
Fishburne Apocalypse Now
Yeah.
situation, but
But just to
t
finish the point about I was kind of astounded by that. I was like, whoa, it's a computers building. We don't know what these robots do because computers built them. I was like, holy shit. I mean, that's right there. That's right where we're standing right now. Crazy.
but it's interesting because I think later movies, and we have seen this much like I'm gonna say the Terminator again, everybody take a drink. But the implication there is that man built Skynet, this giant AI that decided
Right.
that man was no longer needed. In the case of Westworld, it's still kind of a mystery as to what happened and what drove these robots crazy. There is sort of an expositional scene, but it's just a theory that something went wrong with one of the machines in one of the parks. And then, like a couple of days later, we noticed more incidents of this particular malfunction. And so the guy's like, he essentially says that we've only seen this behavior in biological organisms, but somehow it's happening with computers. It is literally a
Right.
computer virus.
Right. Again, the first mention in fiction.
Right. But you get the image seeing the, the black hat cowboy as Yul Brynner is, going on this rampage or whatever, thinking, "Oh, he's malevolent," but no, it's just a malfunction. There's no
Right.
necessary evil intent, which is something I think people later on would come along and say, "Oh, we should just make them evil." But it's scarier if it's just something that, goes awry, especially because, to your point, how many people work at this park? It does seem to be just this handful of scientists in this basement control room, and they
Right.
are locked in, and their oxygen supply runs out. They are so reliant on technology that they don't even have
Yeah.
manual doors.
Well, you know what also astounded me was the science fiction connections in this movie. It's like in the family tree of science fiction robot movies, Westworld is the roots, you know. But Miss Carey, you know, the madam of the House of Ill Repute, was Nurse Chapel, Marge Barrett, Mrs. Gene Roddenberry on
Majel Barrett,
Star Trek.
yes.
Major,
Hmm.
okay, Major. I wasn't sure how to
Majel.
pronounce that.
Yeah.
I've never said it out loud. And and also character actor Alan Oppenheimer, who played the chief supervisor, also portrayed Dr. Rudy Wells on the $6 Million Man. He built the $6 Million Man. Talk about robot connection, Jesus. So yeah, that was pretty cool to me. He also appeared on 3 episodes of Star Trek. So they were definitely doing there was some connective tissue in there. Yeah,
Well, what I love about this movie is it is true science fiction. It's not
right,
far-flung science fiction. It really
right,
is. It's based on real characters who are so kind of oblivious and reliant on the technology of like, "Oh, we're paying $1,000 a day for this experience." And they've set up all these safety protocols. Nothing can go wrong. So it's not until they're faced with this guy who's actually going to kill one of them. Jo James Brolin's character is shot by Yul Brynner, and even when he's
very good
shot, he doesn't realize it really until he's shot again. Yes, that's
point.
major spoiler alert, yes.
I think that James Brolin's hair should have got a separate salary. It's magnificent.
It really is,
It
and
really
he's
is. It's luxurious and forms a perfect 70s do. I was like, God, did I ever have hair like that? No.
I don't think anybody did, but I had
Grand.
that same thought, like, they need to bring that look needs to come back.
It
Um,
does. I think Brolin could do it today. He still has a great head of hair.
he
It's
does.
pretty amazing that both Brolin and Richard Benjamin are still alive 50 years later because they're in their 30s in this movie.
Well, another film that this reminded me of, because you've got this duo, I think it's Pete and John are their characters, if I remember
Uh,
correctly. Um, they are, Richard Benjamin's character has just gotten, he's a lawyer from Chicago. He's just gotten a divorce. He's trying to get over his, his ex. And his buddy, played by James Brolin, says, "Hey, let's go do this Westworld thing." It's something that he's already done. So he figures this will get my friend out of the dumps.
right,
And it reminded me a lot of Eli Roth's Hostel, the first one, of, these carefree kind of American rich tourists going on this exotic exploration of, situations and having all their desires fulfilled by people they don't really see as people. And then something
correct.
goes horribly wrong. It's a great, metaphor. And that moment when James Brolin is shot the first time, I was wondering as audience member, I'm seeing the blood, but it's also not the reaction I expect. So did something malfunction? Did he actually get shot? And then of course he
Right.
gets, the killing blow and he falls over, dying in the dirt. It's a powerful moment. And then you see Richard Benjamin's face like, I don't know what to do here. It's such a
Right.
real reaction. It doesn't feel like acting really.
Interesting too is in the movie trope, trying to figure out things as you're watching a film. I'm like, Dick Van Patten's dead. I'm sorry, that character is going to die. He had all the minimal dialogue. He's an accountant. He's a mousy man. He shoots the mirror as he's doing the doing his fancy gun work. I said, that's all. That's a death rattle if I ever saw one. And he ends up being sheriff, and he's still alive at the end. So who
Well,
knows?
was
Brolin, his magnificent hair is dead.
but Dick Van Patten's character, did he survive? Because the last
I
time we
think
see
so.
him, well, because here's the weird part. At the
Okay.
end, when you see when Brolin and Benjamin are going out into the street, like they wake up in the morning and they're walking out, the
Right.
entire town is deserted except for Yul Brynner's character. Now we
Right.
see over in Roman
Ah,
world, there is like that whole, there
right.
was the melee, but I don't know what happened to everybody in that town. Were they all killed off screen? Were they all deactivated? There's some mystery left at the end of this movie that doesn't feel like a plot hole. It just feels like, again, a mystery. Like, what do you think happened? Normally
Yeah,
that bothers
that's a
me, but
good
in this
point.
case, yeah.
But I like to think he lived. He went on to have 8 kids,
And they were all robots.
and it
Um,
was enough. 8 was enough. Okay. Um, what was another thing I want? Oh, the lovemaking scene was odd, wasn't it? Richard Benjamin's. It was like roll and see hay. two
but they
years
kept,
before.
but they kept cutting,
I know,
right?
but they kept rolling. Roll and see hay.
But they kept cutting, but they almost did like these weird transitions, these cuts, as if like time has elapsed. Like, no, I'm pretty sure you just rolled from side to side. What's going on here? I don't know.
It was so weird. All the women in the movie were badly handled. I have to say, you know, just
What?
well, they were objects for one thing, but they were robots. Okay, they were objects, but
Right.
they were there just to serve man. It wasn't a cookbook. Hello.
Well, what's interesting to me, I think, is you could imagine like a Westworld where people want to go just to go to the Western brothels and have sex with these amazing robots. But it seemed like the draw of it though was to be able to go and shoot and kill people without consequence. Again, kind of like what we saw in Hostel for some of those tourists. Um, what do you make of that?
uh, Repeat the question. I was laughing at your assertions. What
Oh,
was the question?
what do you make of the idea that perhaps even secondary to the draw of having sex with, sex robots was just being able to go someplace and live out your fantasies of just like murdering people in the street with a six
Uh,
shooter?
it make I mean, I don't know, man. We're facing a future where one of these days we're going to be able to put on glasses and do exactly what these people are doing. You know, I'm sure it'll be a suit or something. Um,
Well, I
uh,
mean, you can do
it's
that
hard to
now. It's
say. I mean, what's man's basic instincts? Sex and survival. So, taking care of the sex part, the survival is you get to go and purge people up.
well,
I
and
don't know.
there was that bit of a
That's a
there was a
moral question.
well, but and one that I think Crichton kind of asks in the middle of the movie, because when they
Yeah,
go to that brothel, they get the 2 girls and they're headed
right,
upstairs, and all of a sudden there's this melee outside, and I think Richard Benjamin says, "Oh, I think someone's robbing the bank. Should we go
right.
do something? This is a chance for us to be heroes." And Brolin's like, "No." And then and
Yeah,
even while they're upstairs having sex, you can hear people getting shot and, like, dying in
I
the street
know.
below. Yeah.
I I foresee a future like this. I really do. Not only the robotic sex dolls, which I'll be too old to take care of once they finally get it right. Uh, the I don't know what that means. It's a moral question. So 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 yeah, and then so who knows? I mean, maybe this will take off the sting of the ability for a person to go out and shoot up people. I don't know. Could be a solution to that mentally. It's a moral question.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, but I like that Crichton was even thinking through the audience's questions about this world without having a giant exposition dump, kind of like they did in Jurassic Park. But
Right,
he
right.
but
The
here
first
when you're well, right. But I mean you're wondering like okay, they're shooting these robots with guns. Can and the robots themselves have these guns? They can get into a street fight, but how does that work? Can a person be killed in this universe? And in the ideal situation, the answer is no, because the guns they look like old classic Western pistols, but they're actually machines that
right.
register body heat. So if you try and shoot at something that has like a human temperature, it won't. But if you're firing at something that has no temperature because it's a damn robot, then yeah, you can shoot up and blood will splurt out and it'll look all realistic. And you can have Yul Brenner repeatedly falling out windows with blood packs on. It looks
Yeah.
awesome.
In
But
the background of the film, I read that Crichton wanted those tropes, those Western tropes. So we see the slow motion flips. It was just like, those 40s and 50s and 60s Westerns where they would flip over tables and, you have the bar fight and all that stuff. So, and to your point about the moral implications, I think that's where I attached myself to the film, where I was like, I didn't, I stopped looking at the outside kind of stupidity of it and started looking at what the filmmaker was trying to communicate. So, yeah,
well, I don't know if this movie is going to work as much the second time around as it did
no,
the first.
yeah,
Because part of it is just wacky. There's an entire, like, saloon bar fight, right, that our heroes get, involved in. It's kinda like something out of Blazing Saddles, right?
right, right.
Or
Good
Back to School.
comparison.
No. Um,
Good comparison.
well, there was part of me that was thinking they've got the Romans, the medieval castle, and the Westerns. I just imagine them all coming together like at the end of
Yes,
Blazing Saddles in one
breaking
big
through the
melee.
walls. Um, Well, interesting about the saloon fight, I picture that they're on the set doing it, and Crichton just says, "Screw it, I'm just gonna have everybody drink." And so everybody's drinking a bottle of whiskey in between shots, even, Magil, is there how do you
Majel.
pronounce Majel Barrett was partaking of the whiskey, which I thought was hilarious because the bar fight has been done and overdone, so why not just make fun of it, like you said, Blazing Saddles style? But, yeah, there was a possibility. The Yul Brenner, the gunslinger robot, does come on to the medieval or the Roman set.
The Romans, I believe, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was pretty cool. Uh, the locations were interesting because the Western was done on the back lot of MGM right before they sold the whole thing to
Oh.
developers, and the the Roman area was done at Harold Lloyd's estate. Harold Lloyd was a bizarre dude, had all these statues and uh, and the fountain and everything, and that's where they filmed. So he did a great job of creating location without a budget, obviously. Doing going out to Monument Valley and doing the Western stuff apart from the town. So basically, I don't think he had to build a thing except for the underground lair. And also, interestingly enough, in these films where they're predicting the future, they never think about miniaturization. Everything is huge. You know,
Yes.
with the computers, they had the tapes running in the background, and the monitors were huge, and everything else. And another
Well,
thing I thought of, this is what Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were seeing back in '73 before they burst out and started doing the whole next level of computation and digital building. So,
well,
of
but that
course, it was the first movie too that used digital animation. Did you read the story about that online?
no.
Oh my God, so interesting. So Crichton wanted to have that vision. Remember, we put a new optical division in the gunslinger so he
Mhm.
can see infrared images. So to accomplish that, he went to a computer firm and said, "Can you do this?" You go, "Yes, for $250,000." That you could do on your computer in 10 minutes if you have the software. So anyway, so somebody in the computer world finds out about this, and he does it on the sly at his place in the evenings. So for every 10 seconds of that sequence, which runs maybe 2 minutes total, it took 8 hours to do, and it was just pixelization. It wasn't a complicated animation. So that shows you there's the roots of it, and that shows you how far we've come. And that's one of the values of seeing the movie too.
Right, and again, going back to Terminator, you think about you get those in that movie, it's kind of this red vision with all the
Right.
information, across the readout. But in here, again, there is something very creepy, spooky about like this is what he sees. Everything is just like grids with almost like these abstract versions of the landscape and people, and yet he's able to hone in on them. I want to pick up on something you said about the environment and Steve Jobs and that kind of like the Apple aesthetic.
Yeah.
One of the creepiest, most effective, I think, sets is the guts of this facility where it's just like these long white and gray hallways with
Right.
these overhead lights casting these bizarre like oval shadows everywhere because when you've got this killing machine coming down at the end of the hall, there are no tables that you can like throw in front of it or
Right.
other doors. It's just this long hallway, and
Right.
it really is it's the most effective bit of scenery you can do because like where are you going to go except
And
down another long
it
hallway?
harkens back to the street where gunslingers face off. Same thing.
Yes.
Nothing there. Just you and the guy. I love when Brenner shot the gun and the battery had died in it.
Yes.
But it would have been ineffective because of the rule. And I thought because it clicked, I said, "Oh, it's ineffective because of the rule." No, the battery had died. I loved it. I
Well,
loved it.
the other bit was, there is that wonderful morgue, and I love this behind the scenes of the theme park kind of bit where the cleanup crew comes in. It's pitch blackout. There's obviously been the gunfight and the bank robbery. All these bodies are in the streets. And all of a sudden, you see these vans and these giant lights coming into town and picking up
Right.
these bodies and putting them on conveyor belts that go into the lab. And there's even a
Amazing.
horse that they pick up. But later on, when Richard Benjamin is on the run and he gets into this facility and he has to hide from Yul Brynner's gunslinger, he plays possum. He lays down one of these slabs and you see his
Right.
eye open and he's tracking him as he walks by and he throws this sulfuric acid or whatever on him. The effect of Yul Brynner's face melting, I don't know how they accomplished that, but I can imagine seeing that as a little kid and being traumatized because that looks
Yeah,
better
right.
than any CG like gore effect I've seen in the last decade. It's amazing.
That's interesting you say that because that was typical for movie going in those days. They were always trying new things, and you would just never be able to forget them once you saw them on screen. That's why I love the Poseidon Adventure because they were doing things in that film that I'd never seen in a film before, and it just for somebody who's an early moviegoer, you're just oh that's exciting, oh that's exciting, it's crazy, but it's another thing. Well, I kept thinking of the Wizard of Oz. I'm melting, I'm melting.
But
Uh,
even through all that, his character doesn't have a reaction. He's just staring at you with those Yul Brynner silver eyes.
yeah.
He's smoking and melting at the same time.
The only
Um,
other time we see the silver eyes was the prostitute. I think with Jay. It was with Richard Benjamin. She
yes.
just kind of that was kind of creepy too. It's just the whole exchange was roll, roll, roll and see hay, and then the silver eyes. Forget it. I'm done. So
Well,
let's talk a bit. Had you been familiar with Richard Benjamin's work, or do you know him as an actor at all?
he's one of those guys. The answer is no, not really, but I feel like I've seen him in a bunch of stuff. Particularly, I remember him from childhood. Like, I knew his face, and I
Right,
knew that he'd been in stuff that I had seen at least bits of, but I had no context for him as an actor.
right.
Yeah, but he
Well,
was really good in this.
that period of him doing films is so wild because he made his debut in Goodbye Columbus, which is one of the most awkwardly cringy films you'll ever see, seriously, and he's the perfect actor for it. So he goes on from that to do Catch 22, Portnoy's Complaint, The Sunshine Boys, and directed my favorite year, which I love that movie, as well as Mermaids and Mrs. Winterbourne, among others. So this guy has had quite a career. And now James Brolin, I was like, oh, Mr. Barbara Streisand, great. But I looked at his filmography and I forgot he'd done Amityville Horror, Capricorn One, another great sci-fi film, and Gable and Lombard. He played Clark Gable, for Christ's sake. So I mean, he's even before he was Mr. Barbara Streisand, he had a pretty decent career that went all the way back to the '60s. So interesting dude. And again, both alive. They're both in their 80s, but they're still alive, as well as Alan Oppenheimer. He's 93. I looked him up, still alive.
Wow.
I know.
It's funny because with James Brolin, I love his character. My one of my biggest complaints against the movie, and this no one else cares about this except me, but it says when it opens up, it's like Yul Brenner and Richard Benjamin in, you know,
Right.
and then it says also starring James Brolin. I'm like, oh well, his character is gonna die.
Ah, very good. I thought Dick Van Patten was going to die. I was, wow, they were both, Benjamin had his name above the title. That was pretty good for his like fourth year or fifth year of doing movies. So he's always played the cringy characters. You know, he always plays the guy who's a bit awkward. And he was certainly awkward in this film. He kept giggling. Remember, he kept giggling about the notion of them being in this West world. And I'm like, oh, it's so perfect for Benjamin. He can grow a magnificent mustache. Brolin had the hair, Dick had the mustache.
Well, yes, but here's the thing about mustaches. Brolin was such a wascally wabbit in this movie that
Yes.
I kept seeing Burt Reynolds. I'm like, damn it, there's certain scenes
Ah,
in here. If you put that mustache on, he's
yes.
a spitting image of Burt.
Yes. And also the attitude, right? The way that
Yeah.
Bert would approach roles. That's interesting you say that. I think they were just left to their own devices as far as creating these characters because Crichton was just worried about getting the film done. It's a 30-day shoot, by the way. He literally had 5 minutes to do this film. MGM cast the whole thing, and they also they were terrible, the directors, in the days where they were consolidating and selling off assets and everything. MGM at the end was terrible, and the fact that it still exists is crazy to me after all it's gone through. I wonder who owned it at its lowest point, the brand MGM. Who owned it at their lowest points? Because now it seems influential again. You know, every third, fourth movie is an MGM distribution or company or something like that. So somebody took that brand and revitalized it to the point where we still know it exists.
I would say that's probably the Broccoli family with the James Bond franchise.
Probably. They own
But
everything.
but no, you talk about the actors being left to their own devices.
Yeah,
I feel like that kind of works for these two characters
yeah,
because they are completely oblivious to any danger around them, and rightfully so, because even the scientists who are watching everything on these monitors,
right.
they don't figure out until it's much too late. They're like, "Oh, at one point Brolin's character gets bitten by a snake." And at first I wondered, is it a robot snake or what? And it is a
It
robot
was a
snake, but they're
robot
like,
snake.
right, they're like, "Wait, how can this happen? This shouldn't be allowed to happen." Yeah, spoilers. Um,
I like that. I like
but
the crawl, I have to say. It's fun. It's fun.
technology. Um,
Technology.
but no, what I loved about these guys is they didn't care about anything because they thought they were impervious to any kind of harm. And the Richard Benjamin character, you're right, he is kind of a dweeb. He is squeamish. He giggles inappropriately. He's uncomfortable having sex with a robot prostitute because he still feels guilty about his ex-wife who took
What
him
he's
for
done.
everything he was worth, right? Um, so at the end of the movie, that's why I think this is the perfect ending because he finds
Ah,
himself just in the bowels of this facility without a
right.
clear way out. Even if he does get out, he has no way of signaling to anybody necessarily like, "Hey, come get me in this remote where the hell I am." So he's just kind of left there thinking about, I'm in shock. I don't know what's happening. And then it just cuts to black. However he gets out of there, or if he doesn't,
Well,
he might die in there like
also
at the end of Saw.
with the with the end of the movie becoming the beginning because it's a commercial again, and they use a sound design to blare out, your perfect vacation or whatever the line was.
Mhm.
And again, I said that's so typical 70s because they often in 1970s movies they use sound design to coincide with the visuals to create landscapes of storytelling. So it was so appropriate. But I was somewhat unsatisfied with I again after we talked about it, I'd like to have seen maybe the eyes open on the Yul Brynner robot. Then you're
He didn't have
talking
any eye.
sequel. They didn't think about in those days. It's a moral question.
But hey, he didn't have any eyes at the end of that. He was literally like a somehow a wet, smoldering charcoal briquette man. That was I mean,
with
that was weird.
with a computer board as an empty face. It was really weird. I
Hey,
know.
look, there's one thing I want to touch on before we kind of wrap up.
Yep.
You had mentioned that the women are treated kind of lousy in this movie,
Yeah.
and they are, but I think there is one shining moment that underscores the fact that they are purposely treated badly.
Okay.
Because the one time a character gets agency, it's a fucking robot woman. There's the couple from the beginning. They're kind of an affluent older couple. He's going to Roman world, and I think she's
Right.
going to the medieval world because she's
Right.
heard about the really sexy knights or whatever. So they're both going on to get their respective kinks. This guy, he sets himself up in, to or no, he's in medieval world. I think she goes to
Right.
Roman
Right.
world. Yeah,
Opposite.
right.
Yeah.
It's reverse,
She
yeah.
she does the Roman orgy. He does the medieval. But they're
That's right.
both looking. They're both looking for side action on their obviously dull marriage.
Right. So he gets challenged to a duel to the death by the Black Knight, and this is of course going to be like one of those experiences, like, oh, you two can get into a battle to the death or whatever. But it's
Right.
not going to be that unless something goes wrong with these robots. The night before, he's supposed to go off and have this
The
fateful
night
battle.
before.
I'm
Sorry.
ending this. No, but he gets to, summon the fair maiden to his chambers and
Yeah.
put the moves on because like this is going to be his sexual fantasy fulfilled, and she says no, and then she says no again, and then she says no again. She slaps him across the face and storms out. And the scientists back in the lab are like, these submissive bots aren't supposed to react that way. Like something's
Right.
gone wrong. And it's like, wow, that's a really 2023 kind of progressive commentary on that
Commentary.
whole situation that
Yeah.
I'm not expecting
Good
a half
catch.
century earlier. Yes.
Good catch. Her name, Daphne, was the character's name, and she was played by Anne Randall. Don't think I didn't look that up. She was also a 1967 Playmate of the Month. So you can
Oh.
look that up just like I did. Don't
I'm
touch
sure
images. Don't
I was
touch
gonna say,
images. It's a moral issue.
damn it. But the other touch that I thought was nice was, I think it was when Richard Benjamin was coming, when he was on the run and he's going through the remnants of these, worlds that have been overrun and, kind of descended into chaos. We see the wife who was in the Roman world. She's like in the extreme foreground, just dead with like blood running down her mouth and her eyes
Right,
kind of like open. You're like, oh, that's what happened to her. It's just so kind of a sad and tragic end to this story, but I guess it was sort of inevitable. I
right,
like that the guy who was in the medieval world who, had that failed seduction, when he gets into the fight with the Black Knight, you kind of feel like it's coming, but when he gets run through with that sword, my wife and I were watching it together, we both gasped
hmm,
because there's something just so, like, we felt that these characters, even though they were doomed, we felt their impenetrability. Like, okay, maybe this is Crichton going to play with our expectations. The sword won't work or whatever, but no,
right,
he gets stabbed
yeah.
and horribly killed. Which I want to get your theory on this. I understand the guns that are programmed not to shoot. How do you do that with a duel to the death, like with a sword? Like, what would that mechanic look like if it were working?
You got me, man. I mean, seriously, it was a real sword. And in fact, I must say, the sword play beforehand was again, it's going back, and I think Crichton was kind of playing around with that. It's going back to the swashbuckling Errol Flynn movies. Like, this old man suddenly flipping over the table and he's giving as good as he's getting, back and forth until finally he's run through. Um, I don't know, maybe they're collapsible as a mechanism, and then at this point, everything had gone awry, and so there it is. Stab it
Maybe.
in.
I do
I mean, the
wonder if
snake was amazing, I thought. The snake, was absolutely a complex machine when they opened it up. It was crazy. I love that.
right, you can see, like, the wires and, like, there's a
Yeah,
battery and an underlay of tinfoil, literally,
yeah,
but it still looks like something someone would build.
yeah.
But
Yeah. Again, that's why I
I
started to really get into the film. I'm like, there's something going on here that's above this kind of wacky, fantasy world. So really
well,
worth seeing, by the way. And thank you for again recommending. This was one of your recommendations, and I really appreciated it because it fulfills my '70s, library a bit. Because that's one that you really, if you're filmy and you're talking '70s movies, Westworld's got to be on your list. There you go.
yeah, and I rented it off Amazon, but I'm gonna buy the Blu-ray at some point because it's
There you
great,
go.
and I would love to see this, I know the year is almost over, but it would be nice if someone did, like, a 50th anniversary screen. I'd love to see this on the big screen with a big crowd,
It would be great because it's beautifully shot in Panavision too. I mean, the vistas and everything. I was like, damn. Not only does this movie say something, it looks great. You know.
Yeah,
So
totally.
yeah, just I'm definitely going. I'm not saying it's a perfect score, but I'm certainly in my 5-star rating. I'm giving it 4.5. So
I'm gonna go 5. I'm
oh,
struggling to
perfect
find something
score.
that really bothered me about it, but
Cool.
yeah. I don't know if it holds up. It might be a 4.5 on my next viewing because I've already thought about these things, and I'm
Yes,
like, "That
exactly.
bar fight went on way too long," but, um
But again, he made fun of it with everybody drinking every 5 minutes in it too. And it was a lot of fun. I don't know. It just there was a lot of things going on in this film, maybe unintentionally because of the way it was shot, how quickly it was shot. But I think certainly everybody in the film gave it their all to communicate the story, and that's really what made it work. Even
Definitely.
the asshole-ish characters like the guy who was run through with the sword.
We've already spoiled it 10 minutes
Yes, we
ago.
did. It's all spoiled.
Alright, Pat the Uber
So,
critic McDonald. Oh, what?
yes.
Sorry. I was gonna
No, no,
say
we'll talk after you do the outro.
okay. So, Pat the Uber critic McDonald, thank you very much for hanging out and talking Westworld. This
Yep,
is our Halloween episode. This is going up on Halloween afternoon or night or whenever the hell I get it up. But yeah, it's appropriate because it's people and they're wearing masks or robots wearing people masks.
exactly.
There you
And there's
go.
some great
Perfect.
costume ideas in it too, if you got a last-minute party to go to.
Very last minute. You just dress up as a robotic snake. You just need some tin foils, wires, and a battery, and you're all good to go.
Did you see
Um,
my, Jean-Luc Picard?
I did, and sir, I gotta say, you made it so. Complete with the
Easiest
hand
costume I've
gesture.
ever done in my life. Easiest. All it takes
Uh,
is that chrome dome, baby. All it takes is this.
ah!
Ah!
That is quite the reveal. But oh, alright, sir. I'm gonna let you go. We're gonna be back next month talking
Yes,
about,
for a very special episode of There's Nostalgia Like Nostalgia.
yes, we're gonna be talking about executive action, and if
Yeah.
all goes well, it's going to drop on the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination, which will be quite a feat and possibly a treat. I haven't seen it, so I'm relying on your
I'm
recommendation.
really looking forward to you seeing this movie and your opinion, especially I don't know how much knowledge you have, but I'm virtually an encyclopedia about the assassination. I will talk about my trip to Dallas next month.
Please do. All
Nostalgia,
right.
like nostalgia.
Yes. All right, everybody. Definitely check back in for that. Be sure and support Pat in all of his critical endeavors. Links down below, all that good stuff. If you like this conversation, please like and subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thanks very much and take care.
Happy Halloween!
I thought you froze there for a second. You got me. You totally got me.